Hi, this video is looking at top 10 short story tips to ace the paper 1 section B exam. So like I said, we'll look at 10 tips for you to really fly through it. So tip 1 is create a plan. So a plan for the story is really simple: beginning, middle and end. Beginning in we introduce a character, the middle is we introduce a tension or a problem, the end is we resolved that problem or we don't. It's essential just you decide on your ending before you start writing, because if you don't know where you need to get to, it will go all over the place. And many writers work out the endings first, then work backwards. This can work well because endings are often the hardest part of the story. So why do we plan? Well, it's crucial. If I didn't have my beginning, middle, and end, I wouldn't know where to go with my writing. And lots of time for students, if they don't know their end, it's very, very muddled and doesn't make sense, and that looks very clear to the examiner. You will get a mark for your plan. So the person on the left would have started off with 0. The person on the right would have got a nice little mark to start off with. So here is a plan about skydiving. So nice and simple. Before the plane, middle going up in the plane, ending jumping out. So it's a very simple plan. And that's roughly how it worked out. I would say this person needs to do more of an ending. It ends very abruptly. And here are some other endings or plans, so feel free to look at them. Also, a lot of my students base it on maybe 5 minutes of a clip of a film. That's something you may want to think about. Yeah, so I would say before you go into that exam, before you start your exam, my plan, I've said beginning, middle, and end, but I would also have going into that exam, my beginning, middle, and end, a memorable opening sentence, a memorable closing sentence, and a setting with sensory language, which I'll talk about more later. Tip 2, draft an original imaginative story. So you should need to go into the exam with 1 or 2 story ideas and pick the title closest to it. You do get marks in the exam for being original, imaginative, and clear. So make your story clear. I would always try and pick a story that is fun to write, will surprise the examiner, and what you can do in 45 minutes and 2.5 pages. So the 2 types of story you could plan would be something realistic, so something that may really have happened to you. It's always good to write from personal experience. So this could be about a school or a job. This person did it on a bad first date they had, or a more ambitious story like a plane crash or intruder, or a shark attack. This person here did an intruder, which is actually the first scene of the most recent James Bond film, No Time to Die. So if you actually typed in YouTube No Time to Die opening, you could see what they based it on. Stories to avoid: fairy tales, wizards, going back in time, teenage pregnancy, jugaboos, inappropriate plots. Other things to avoid: anything too serious or complex, swearing comes across as immature, boring metaphors and similes, and dream endings. Remember, we want to be original and imaginative, and dream endings is the opposite of that. Successful ones have been these ones. Feel free to pause. Yeah, so what you do is you want to pick the title closest to one you've drafted, and you basically just pick the closest one and do not make up a new one on the spot. So say, for example, I had a story about a bungee jump. I could easily do B here, right about a time when you do a difficult choice or decision. But say if I drafted a story about bungee jumping, let's say if I did a story about the intruder, and there was nothing on here about the 4 titles about an intruder, you just pick the closest one and put it in your opening paragraph. Do not make a new one up. So this is my story about intruder. It's got nothing to do with a wedding, but that's the title I have to pick. So all I've done is kept the same paragraph, but I've picked the wedding and just in my second line, my first line of the story was he was dressed in all white, and my second line is, however, he didn't look at a bride at a wedding. So all I've done is shoved it in there. You've just got to be quite clever with it in the opening paragraph. Remember, the 4 titles in the exam are called prompts for a reason. They're prompting you to write a story. I guarantee the examiner, if you pick the wedding, he or she does not want to mark a story about a wedding cake or a bride going down the aisle 500 times. Be imaginative and just shove it in your opening paragraph. Tip 3, pick a setting with fantastic sensory language, and the best one is sound. So the 5 senses are a way of creating imagery in the reader's minds to make them feel they're actually in the scene. So if it was a story, a sentence about the smell of bacon, we all know what the smell of bacon's like. We all know what the sound of shattering glass sounds like. So describe the full range of senses. Taste is a hard one to do, so don't cram it if you don't need to. If you're talking about senses, if you're talking about sound, for example, I don't need you to say I can hear or I can hear the sound. Just tell me the sense. The sense of sight is probably the dullest, so the other ones add a richness to the imagery. And I would pick a setting, so a location for my story that is very good from a sensory language point of view. So, for example, a busy train station, a fairground, a festival, a kitchen where obviously you could do the sounds of the chef, but also the smell of the food, a prom. Yeah, and here are some other ones that might be good. So pick a setting that is great for sensory language, and here are some sensory words if you want to pause the video. Again, opening paragraph of the same thing I just showed you. Sensory language here. We've got the sight of someone dressed in all white, the sun shining down, stomped, the snow muted his footsteps. So we know the sound of walking, what's walking in snow sounds like. Here's some more that we won't go over. But again, all the way through my 500 word story, these are the 4 things I want to cram in. Short sentences, sensory language, strong verbs, and figurative language. Okay, tip 4, start in the middle of the action. So starting the action with a dramatic first scene is a great way to create impact and really grab the reader. Begin in the middle of things at a dramatic point in the story. Come on. So, for example, grab the reader's attention with a powerful first. Start with the action, like I said, and it'd be a really bad start to talk about the weather or what a room is like. So, say if I was doing this scene here, which is a scene from Dumb and Dumber, I wouldn't start it with I drove up to the petrol station. I would start it with something like I heard my shoes sizzling. So start with the action. Start with them being on fire. Don't start with I drove up to the petrol station and I got the petrol pump out. Start with the exciting bit. And again, if it was a crime story, don't start with the detective woke up, got out of bed, cleaned her teeth and put the kettle on. Start with the detective found the body. And we want more action than physical description. So keep stuff happening. Try not to talk about the weather too much or what the room or what someone's wearing for a paragraph. Tip 5, set your story over a short period of time. So try to set your story over a short period of time, maybe even a few minutes. Don't set it over days, weeks, months, or years. You've only got 45 minutes. You've only got 2 pages. So my advice to students is describe the most exciting 10 minutes of your main character's life. So an exciting 10 minutes. Tip 6, use strong verbs. So if we look at this guy running across the battlefield, try not to use adverbs in your short story too much. In paper 2, where you're doing speeches and letters, it's good to do adverbs like firstly, finally, and all that. But in creative writing, it can be boring sometimes. So instead of he ran quickly across the battlefield, get rid of the boring adverb and make the verb, e.g., ran, stronger. So instead of he ran across the battlefield, we could have he raced across the battlefield, he sprinted across the battlefield, he dashed. All of these tell us that the guy is running without he ran quickly. Much better. And here are some more if you want to pause, feel free. So again, instead of the man walked arrogantly down the street, I've got the man strutted down the street. But again, pause if you want to read more. And this is from another paragraph about a bad first day. But again, lots of strong verbs here. Not I walked nervously, I stumbled. Not I shut the door firmly, I slammed the door shut. So again, really good. And all the way through, we've got strong verbs. Again, that intruder story, all the yellows here, a really good example of strong verbs. Okay, tip 7, figurative language. So this is this kind of stuff, similes, metaphors, and so on. Again, this is from the first date one, lots of figurative language all the way through. A common mistake is students do like 100 similes, maybe just so you can do one example of each. Again, all the way through, just a few examples showing the examiner, stylistic features showing off to the examiner. I know all this stuff. Again, the intruder one, I've got personification with the wind was screaming, and I've got a simile with the broken glass shards were scattered on the floor like pearls. Again, all the way through, I've got those 4 things. Okay, tip 8, create a memorable opening closing sentence. 98% of books are sold on the strength of the first 2 sentences, so we want to make them really great and grab the reader's attention. So techniques are dialogue, statement, like a memorable statement, action, a rhetorical question. If it was me, I would start with a really, really memorable statement or dialogue. Probably dialogue is a really good way to start it. Here are some famous ones from famous books. I was 12 going on 13 the first time I saw a dead human being. So a really memorable statement from Stephen King's book The Body, which was made into a film called Stand By Me. This is from I Am Legend about zombies. On those cloudy days, Robert Neville was never sure when sunset came. And sometimes in the streets, they were in the streets before he could get back. So the use of the word they there really stands out to the reader what's going on. And then a few from 1984 and one from A Christmas Carol. And here's a circular bit of narrative where this person did a skydiving one, and they started their story with "I looked up to the sky and sighed," and they've ended it with "I looked up to the sky and smiled." So that's not particularly great, but you could think of maybe one where you're using a very similar opening and closing line. And remember, the ending is the final impression the reader has of your writing. Your ending should be included in your plan. Think about happy, sad, funny. Don't change the mood. So if it's happy all the way through, don't end it with the person dying or something. Craft your final sentence carefully. This is the last bit of your writing an examiner will read, and do not say it was a dream. Tip 9, use some dialogue. So we do need people speaking. Like I said, first sentence is a good time to do it. Dialogue is a conversation between your characters. Again, try not to say said all the way through. So again, we could use those strong verbs. So with your dialogue tags, which is where it sort of indicate who's spoken. Did you get my letter? Asked Katie. Asked is the dialogue tag. Try not to say said all the way through. So you could say stuttered, whispered, and so on. Pause the video if you want to look for some more. And your story shouldn't look like a script. It shouldn't look like this, where every single line is a new person speaking or a different. It shouldn't be a conversation. I would say you want to do something like this, where you've got dialogue maybe 6 or 7 times through your story. Last tip: check for spag errors at the end of the exam. Check these things in particular. Tenses, which is the main thing students do. They flip between the past and present tense, which is the main thing they do wrong. Run-on sentences. Oh, sorry about that. Run-on sentences and apostrophes. And if you look at the mark scheme, you can't really get out of the bottom 1 to 3 if you don't have control of tense, and you don't do your sentence structure, and you don't do your basic punctuation. So those things I've shown you, you can't really get out more than 3 out of I think it's 16 if you don't do the things I've just said. So try not to have huge sentences, in other words, run-on sentences. If you're one that has 3 or 4 lines long, you don't need to put a full stop in. The main mistake students make with their spag is run-on sentences. Yeah, so that's where you've got 2 sentences together with either no punctuation or incorrect punctuation, which is basically a comma. So if you look here, there's 2 separate sentences. I felt hungry, I ate an apple, where the students put a comma or nothing. So to fix your run-on sentences, you put a full stop, split into 2 sentences like this, or you do a comma and a connective. So I felt hungry, comma, so I ate an apple, or I felt hungry because I ate an apple, and so on. Again, so this is a really common example. So I've just given you a random sentence from a story. Again, this would be quite a good little couple of sentences. But here, the top one, they put a comma in, and the bottom green one, they just put nothing in. So they either need a full stop and a comma and a connective, which I haven't done on the bottom one. So again, that's annoying. So full stop or a comma or a connective. And also check your there, and there's. They have a common mistakes. Check your capital letters, they're common mistakes. And check your apostrophes, they're really common mistakes. Obviously, our phones do it for us, but in the exam, we need to check it ourselves. Set your story in the past. That's what I would do. My advice would be, because then that cuts out that tense error that a lot of students do. Just make sure all your verbs are in the past tense. So to recap them, your top 10 tips for your short story are: create a plan, which should have your beginning, middle, and end, opening sentence, closing sentence, and a setting, which has great sensory language. Draft an original imaginative story. Pick a setting with fantastic sensory language. Start in the middle of the action. Set your story over a short period of time, I would say 5 minutes. Use strong verbs. Use figurative language. Create a memorable opening and closing line. Use some dialogue, and check for spag errors at the end of the exam.